This is a 2003 KTM 300 MXC. Okay, I'm about to replace the seal on the right side cylinder, which is leaking, and I might as well go ahead and replace the seal on the left side because, well, that bottom nut right there, or bolt, is frozen in place. Having removed the whole caliper, I can just let that sleeping dog lie and leave it there. I just simply pulled this thing out from this side and it just came out. Now I don't really know where this goes, but this little clip fell out with it, so I'll figure that out later on. I didn't have the exact size. That's a 24 millimeter, requires a 24 millimeter wrench, and that just rolled over on it. I went down and got to Home Depot of all places, where you can still buy individual wrenches of up to millimeter sizes, up to about 30 millimeters, and give them a little free advertising. So taking the cap off before you remove it from the triple tree is the better idea. I stuck the tubes back in the triple tree, clamped down the bottom bolt, bottom clamp. I also bought a 6-point impact 24 millimeter socket, which I also found at Home Depot of all places. Called all the auto parts stores and they didn't have anything like that, at least a wrench. So I got the 6-point socket, impact socket, and I had to pull the handlebars off of the bike to get the socket onto it, because all they had was a deep well, and I put an electric impact wrench on it right there, and the impact wrench broke it loose in in a second. Just whap, is gone, is loose. I tell you one thing. Now, an impact wrench will tear something up, but it's a variable speed impact wrench, and that's one of the best tools I ever bought. Everything that I had to remove was right-hand threads. There is another little tip that I can give you if you don't discover it yourself. This is the ring that goes into the sleeve, that goes into the tube that you have to remove before you can pop the slide hammer, the seal, out. You'll see that on one side right here it's notched, the other side is not. That notch is provided so that you can get some kind of a little pick tool like this right here underneath it to start working that thing out. Well, the videos tell you that you just simply slide this thing off of the tube off of the piston, and it'll pull out the seal with it. Well, this one here, it didn't pull out the seal. Working the screwdriver down the back side of the seal ultimately pulled it out. Essentially pounding the tube housing onto the workbench caused the other parts to fall right on out. Finally found a video that's specific to this shock, and it displays, and there is also confirmed by the parts list, that there is a sleeve. There is another one of these bushings that is here inside the tube and is still in there, and then there's this thin sheet metal sleeve that goes inside, and then this one here goes inside this end in order to secure that sleeve and keep it in place. And in the video it shows this sleeve and both these bushings all coming out with out with the plunger. But and they do indicate that sometimes, to get it all apart, mostly they're talking about getting the bushing out, to heat up the end right here, and with a torch they use a very small amount of heat. That bushing and the sleeve and this retaining bushing stayed in place. And the key words to search for on video are the WP 48 millimeter. So I'm going to just slip this bushing back in there and put it all back together with the sleeve all still in place. The upper preload adjusters don't work. On this particular one, the center pin there is broken off. There should be a center pin that goes down the center of this tube here when it's installed, and that pin is broken off, which the next question is where is the broken off piece, or was it broken off the last time it was taken apart and the broken off piece is not in there? Consequently, on the other tube, on the other shock absorber, the adjuster was broke off on this end, and looking at it on the other end, the preload pin was in place, but there's no way of telling what the preload was. So on this one, the preload can never be more than nothing, and on the other one, the preload might be might have some setting that that I can't tell how many clicks it is. So I've ordered, it's a small cost, the things are $32 a piece, a complete assembly. I ordered both of them new. I want to mention something here while I've got it in mind. This is the hex head, or the hex shaped part of the plunger, that is where you put the 22 millimeter wrench on in order to get the cap screwed off of this threaded end here. On either side of it is a fixed washer, if you will, or a shoulder, and that shoulder provides the backstop when the wrench is in place to keep the spring depressed so that you can thread everything off without having the spring applying pressure on it the whole way. It's this has a certain thickness associated with it, this hex head, and many wrenches, if you've got a thick 22 millimeter hex head wrench, it won't fit. The wrench has to get in between these two shoulder faces, back supports. My wrench was slightly too big. I took this one onto my bench grinder and just simply ground down the edges near the jaws. Well, this sleeve doesn't slip easily down into the tube, so I'm going to try something I've seen on YouTube videos before. I'm going to put it in the freezer here and get it very close, hoping to shrink it up as much as it can be shrunk, and then I'm going to heat up the tube with my trusty MAP gas torch. I'm going to heat up the tube, and then I'm going to slide it all down in there together with some WD-40 maybe, and see if I can't work that sleeve down in there, because that sleeve acts as the guide to keep the piston here. It works as a guide to keep the piston here straight in conjunction with another sleeve that's farther down in there. And it keeps the piston centered in the tube, to keep the sealing and etc. So it's a very tight fit. The other one slipped in fairly easily, and this one here though is not slipping in real easy. Okay, that sleeve that I put in the freezer went in just fine. It's seated down in there where it needs to be. I froze it, I put it, all assembled it, and I put some heat on the tube here, and I set it all back upright on the bench. And I did happen to buy the seal driver because it was a small expense, given the potential that it might save me having to do this job all over again if I were to damage the seal by trying to drive it in with a screwdriver or something like that, or damage the fork or something. So combined with this sleeve this spacer right here, which goes in on top of that this washer here that goes in on top of that sleeve, I was able to just tap it in and align. It was more of just getting it aligned properly to get it into place so it doesn't get cocked in the hole. And then getting cocked in the seat was what was preventing it from going in the first place. I don't really know if I had to heat it up or anything. I could have used the slide hammer with this washer to set it into place to begin with, but it worked out pretty good. If your experiences on disassembly are like mine, that is, the sleeve that's in the video and the upper bushing, the upper guide bushing, stay in place, they do so because the spring-loaded guide that they discuss relative to relative to reassembly, the last thing they put on is clearing that upper bushing without pulling it out. So it's probably not a good idea to extend the piston out of the tube where it passes, that sleeve passes below that bushing, because you may have trouble getting it back into place. So as an added mention, the plastic bags that the seals came in made a good, combined with some grease on the inside of the seals, made a good seal bullet. Another little issue I encountered is that watching the video, I noticed that they had quite a bit of threads exposed on this plunger here above this nut interface that the wrench attaches to hold the spring in place while you tighten the cap on. A lot more threads than I had. In one case, I only had about that many. In one of the shafts, I only had about that much threads exposed. The video showed like this much threads, just judging from the image that I captured. I didn't tighten it or anything. I suppose that the cap will screw down onto it, and then as I continue to twist it onto it, the plunger nut here will screw back up onto the shaft until they meet. So I exposed as much of those threads as the depth of those threads would allow, and then I screwed the cap on until it bottomed out. And then of course this nut right here backed up onto the remaining threads until it tightened down. I don't think you can go wrong on it, but that little pin there needs to go down inside that aluminum tubing that goes down through the center of the plunger. I think that by screwing it on, it'll right itself, but you need to make sure that that's the case, because I did find that pin broken off in the original cap. And so just like the other one, I screwed this nut down onto this shaft here to expose all the threads that it would allow. And then I'm going to put the cap down on there. It'll only screw down maybe about that far. And then as I continue to tighten, this nut will screw up, will screw upward to take up the excess slack. Because both of these preloaders were broken on these caps, I don't know what the original preload setting was. So I'll try to look up and see if I can find some guidelines. I'm of average weight, and probably everything that is the factory setting is probably good enough for me. From what I've read, it's very important to bleed the air out of these cylinders every now and then. All the constant pumping of them, they get air in them through the seals, I guess. But the stock comes with a Phillips head screw in there. And I found that if you don't have a Phillips head screw in your back pocket, you tend to just say, well, I'll do it later, and that keeps on going, and pretty soon that'll contribute to seal leaks. So these little Schrader valves are pretty cheap, about $7-8 for a pair, and makes the process real easy.